Berlin, late May 1941. In a cramped attic above the Abwehr's cryptographic bureau on Terpitzufer, senior signals officer Leni Adler works the night shift, sleeves rolled up against the rising summer heat. A faint Morse stream, barely stronger than atmospheric static, flickers across her HRO receiver. It is routed through the Soviet naval codebook, yet one five-letter group keeps repeating in clear, MATRY. Leni's instinct tells her this is no operator's error. She hand-plots the traffic on onion skin sheets, then feeds the garbled text into the Bureau's newly acquired SG-39 cipher machine. The output is gibberish, until on a hunch, she runs it against an outdated 1937 naval key. Words shimmer into clarity. Orders confirm Matryoshka transfer complete. Urgent to Comrade Vasilevsky. Proceed with phase snowmelt. By dawn, she has compiled a black-bound synopsis labeled Project Matryoshka Preliminary Assessment. The report suggests a clandestine weapons program already entering deployment, yet Moscow's regular army and NKVD traffic remain silent. When Admiral Canaris, head of the Abwehr, skims the file, his normally placid expression fractures. He convenes an emergency conclave with OKW intelligence and leaks just enough to rival branches to ignite internecine panic. Within hours, rumors flood the Wilhelmsplatz cafes, where junior officers gossip over schnapps. Stalin is perfecting a death ray, or a new gas that solidifies blood, or perhaps an armored ghost battalion bred in Siberian laboratories. Wilhelm Keitel dismisses it as Slavic bluff. Reinhard Heydrich demands immediate special handling of Adler for stepping outside her clearance. Hitler, preparing Directive 21 in the Reich Chancellery Garden, merely circles the word Matryoshka in crimson, adding an exclamation mark. While panzers mass on the Bug River and field commanders fret over fuel allocations, one whispered codename now shapes every strategy session. Whatever Matryoshka is, it must be neutralized before the first engine roars eastward. Unbeknownst to them, the stray signal Leni caught was never meant for Soviet ears at all. It was bait. But in the feverish summer of 1941, the Reich's destiny has already begun to pivot on a handful of misdecoded syllables. Eastern Poland, 22 June, 1941, dusk. SS Obersturmbannführer Karl Richter stands atop an armored Draisine that trembles on freshly laid track. The invasion is only hours old, yet the line before him gleaming, uncharted, and arrow straight toward the Belarusian border was clearly built in secret months ago. Its creosote smell mingles with pine and cordite, and every tie bears a Cyrillic stamp dated A341. Intelligence had sworn no Soviet rail existed here. Still, freight whistles echo somewhere ahead like ghosts heralding the unknown. Karl's detachment of Feldgendarmerie uncouples a derailed Soviet flat car, abandoned at a switching spur. Beneath tarpaulin, they uncover crates, stenciled MOT-60 and wrapped in paraffin cloth. Inside, engine blocks cast from aluminum magnesium alloy, far lighter than any German metallurgy has achieved. One mechanic mutters, "Hexerei, witchcraft." Karl pockets a bolt stamped with the nested doll logo he saw days earlier in Leni Adler's report. Matryoshka. Night thickens. Fireflies flicker like tracer rounds. Karl orders a forward reconnaissance on a commandeered inspection trolley. 10 kilometers in, the single track blossoms into a hidden marshalling yard, carved into a birch-covered ravine. Floodlights swing from improvised towers, revealing Soviet engineers hastily coupling armored boxcars to a squat steam locomotive, belching blue coal smoke. A banner draped across a maintenance shed reads Zavod Pobeda, Victory Works. Through field glasses, Karl spots a man in grease-stained overalls barking orders in flawless German. The profile, sharp chin, left ear nicked by an old dueling scar, punches his memory like a blow. Jakob Richter, elder brother, lost at Tannenberg in 1914, officially listed vermissed and mourned for a generation. But here he stands, evidently alive, evidently Soviet. Karl's mind reels. Jakob had been a pacifist engineer, the family prodigy who quoted Goethe at supper and vanished with a volunteer medical train. How did he become architect of a clandestine rail lifeline? Betrayal. Co-opted idealism. There's no time for answers. A sentry's shout splits the air. Searchlights pivot. The trolley's crew panics. Karl fires a flare. Green for retreat. Under MG fire, they rattle backward into darkness, sparks skidding off wheels. Back at Divisional HQ, Karl drafts an urgent memorandum to OKH. Enemy possesses independent rail corridor, enabling rapid material withdrawal east. Command figure may be German expatriate, with intimate knowledge of Reich industrial protocols. He stops short of writing Jakob's name, scrawling instead, Subject R. Confession would invite Himmler's suspicion, and worse, questions about family loyalty. Yet the revelation gnaws at him. If Jakob built these tracks, then each kilometer Karl's panzers travel is a path his brother anticipated, perhaps even prepared to sabotage. Blood and duty now run on the same steel ribbon, but in opposite directions. Karl sleeps not at all. In the first gray of morning, he requisitions a fast armored scout train and against orders heads back toward the ravine. He tells subordinates they are to sever a Soviet supply artery. In truth, he seeks a face-to-face reckoning with the ghost who wears his surname. Unaware, the brothers hurtle toward each other like locomotives on a single line, neither yet willing to yield the right of way. Chelyabinsk Oblast, late July 1941. A convoy of camouflaged trucks crawls along a gravel road that never appears on Soviet maps, its headlights hooded, its license plates swapped at every checkpoint. Beyond a final ridge of larch and granite, the earth suddenly splits open into a crater the size of a cathedral nave. Steel gantries bristle along the rim, disguised beneath netting that mimics moss-covered scree. Down in the chasm lies Zavod Pobedi, Victory Works, an undermountain colossus hammered into the bedrock by political prisoners and Gulag volunteers. At the gate, NKVD Captain Irina Valenkova inspects each driver's papers with reptilian patience. She has memorized every face permitted inside. Discrepancies mean a bullet, no questions. Her orders come directly from Marshal Zhukov, yet even she is permitted to know only half the complex's purpose. The other half is guarded by a silence thicker than the permafrost that seals the lower levels. Inside, the air tastes of ozone and hot oil. Chief Engineer Jakob Richter, his German surname scrubbed from every official file, oversees a night shift trial of the T-60-U Lightning engine. An experimental turbine mounted on a skeletal tank chassis winds on a rolling test rig, caged behind blast shutters. Its pistons are cast from a new aluminum-magnesium alloy, so light it rings like crystal when struck. A single midnight blue cylinder alone is worth a month of Red Army payroll. Jacob circles the rig with a stopwatch. His once professor's hands now burnt umber from machine grease. He notes the vibration harmonics dipping under threshold, lips curling into a tired smile. The Lightning can rev 300 RPM higher than yesterday, without throwing a prop rod. This marginal gain means nothing to party bureaucrats, but everything to him. At -30 Tograsi on the front, a few extra horsepower will be the difference between sprinting out of an ambush and becoming scrap. Yet, even amid success, a disquiet hums. Twice tonight. The turbine backfires with an Arctic cough, as if the engine itself still hates the cold. Jacob knows why. The metallurgy was never meant for sub-zero starts. He needs cryo-rated lubricants, but shipments are delayed because special cargo keeps leapfrogging the requisition queue. That cargo is what worries the workers in the foundry canteen. They whisper of Sector O, the lowest sub-basement sealed by biometric locks and guarded by men with lead-lined aprons. On freight elevators, they have seen crates labeled only with the same nested doll insignia stamped on every lightning part, but these crates frost over from the inside. Rumor insists they contain a catalyst so volatile it must never thaw. One welder claims a crate ruptured last week. A single breath of the escaping vapor turned a foreman's lungs to ice before he could scream. Jakob dismisses such campfire tales until Irina Valenkova appears at his workstation with an unsigned order. Effective immediately, all personnel associated with the Lightning program will relocate to Sector O for classified integration trials. She offers no explanation, only a stare that dares him to protest. He feels the ground tilt. Integration with what? The Lightning is his life's work. But down in that frozen vault lurks an agenda he cannot read. Still, refusal is treason, and treason ends at dawn against a quarry wall. So Jakob removes his engineer's cap, steals his voice, and agrees to the transfer. An hour later, he boards the freight lift beside crates rimmed in hoarfrost. As the doors grind shut, the hydraulic cables groan like distant artillery, and the temperature plummets enough for his breath to bloom. A red lamp flickers overhead, illuminating the Matryoshka emblem doll within doll within doll, reminding him that every secret in this war contains another nested inside. Far above, the August stars wheel silently over the Urals, unaware that in the caverns below, a machine meant to outrun German panzers is about to be married to something infinitely more dangerous. And somewhere along a parallel rail line, Jakob's brother speeds eastward, unknowing that his destination and Jakob's descent are but two halves of the same iron destiny. Reich Chancellery, Berlin, 31 August, 1941. The mirrored marble corridors echo with the click-tap of jackboots as Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler escorts his most eccentric advisor, Karl Maria Willigut, Weisthor, master occultist of the SS, toward a locked reading room lit only by stained glass skylights. Willigut's silver beard trembles. His eyes, roomy yet piercing, carry the haunted sheen of a man who claims to remember lifetimes predating Charlemagne. On a velvet-draped table rests the prize, a 1,200-year-old birch-bark palimpsest smuggled from the Novgorod Antiquities Museum by Einsatzgruppe C. Its surface is scored with Proto-Slavic runes overlaying an even older Ugric script. Most scholars deem it illegible, but Willigut sees a lattice of hidden chronograms, dates encoded within acrostics only a rune master would notice. He traces a single line: "When wolfish iron bleeds the winters, the eagle's heart shall freeze mid-screech." A chill steals across his spine. The numerological value of the stanzas converges on 1941. For Willigut, coincidence does not exist, only messages from the ancestral Irminsul memory. He photographs each rune under ultraviolet, then dashes off a memorandum sealed with a red Sigrunen wax stamp. Immediate audience with the Führer required. Matter of existential portent. That evening, in the maple-paneled War Directive Chamber, Hitler presides over a volatile triumvirate. Field Marshal Keitel touts raw tonnage captured. Goebbels flourishes press-clipping triumphs. Willigut arrives clutching the palimpsest like a holy relic. Outside, thunder drums over the Tiergarten, Berlin's first autumn storm.
Fury.
Mein Führer, Willigut begins. Voice a resonant baritone
Prepare
trained
the
in
secret
Viennese
directive.
salons. These runes foretell that steel shall meet winter's heart and shatter. Your eastern armies advance into a cosmic snare. Hitler's brow creases. He respects symbolism,
You must
has
locate
long
the
cultivated
artifacts.
Wagnerian
The search
myth,
is of utmost
but hates
importance.
prophecy that contradicts his will. Nonsense, he snaps. Yet fingers drum the table's edge. Keitel suppresses a smile. He believes the invasion's only threat is Moscow's mud. Willigut persists, producing a hand-inked star chart, showing Mars entering Capricorn. The same alignment, he notes, that eclipsed Emperor Frederick Barbarossa the night before his crusade met disaster. History rhymes in astral cycles, my Führer. Hitler's patience thins. He flicks ash from his cigarette. But Goebbels, ever attuned to narrative, leans in. If the Soviets learn we heed runes, Joseph, Hitler warns, they'll laugh from the Kremlin to Vladivostok. Willigut counters with hard currency, photographs of frost-crippled German trucks outside Smolensk, taken only 3 nights prior despite temperate forecasts. Winter is arriving 6 weeks premature along the axis of these runes, he says. Nature itself obeys the prophecy, though outwardly dismissive. Hitler later instructs Adjutant Martin Bormann to draft a confidential clause to Führer Directive 35. Select engineer battalions will receive emergency winter gear allocations, quietly, so as not to spook the Reich's press. Himmler, sensing opportunity, orders Esan and Airbus scholars to Novgorod to salvage any companion texts. Yet paranoia blooms. Reinhard Heydrich petitions to interrogate Willigut's translators, suspecting Slavic sorcery and potential leaks to Moscow. In private, Goebbels pens speech fragments recasting any future winter setback as a trial foretold by ancient destiny through which the German Volk will emerge purified. Meanwhile, Willigut retreats to Weipelsburg Castle's north tower, poring over rune lattices by guttering candlelight. As equinox gales howl through arrow slits, he pieces together a grisly corollary. The prophecy's final stanza, scratched so faint it's visible only under foxfire. Solution speaks of a brother's hand that tips the scales of thunder. He cannot yet parse its meaning but senses it concerns 2 figures whose shared blood will steer the war's tide. Willigut dispatches a ciphered postcard to Berlin. The rune's shadow falls not on the map, but upon men of one lineage. Find them before frost finds us all. The card vanishes into Himmler's in tray, buried beneath requisitions for now. Above the Reich, lightning forks across the midnight sky. In its strobing glare, it seems as though the eagle atop the Reichstag shivers, an omen unnoticed by most, yet recorded in the dreams of a single clairvoyant colonel bivouacked far to the east, where autumn already tastes of snow. Kola Peninsula, 14 September 1941, inside the midnight sun's last pale glow. Oberleutnant Erich, Eisvogel Brandt, ace of Luftwaffe 5th, banks his frost-rimmed Messerschmitt Bf 109 over a glacier that glitters like broken glass. Brandt volunteered for this meteorological sweep, suspecting the real mission was photographic. His brief allows only 1 sentence: investigate anomalous radio silence north of Murmansk. But silence itself cannot cast shadows across radar. Someone is masking traffic, and OKL wants eyes. At 2,000 meters, his wings carve through aural ribbons. Then Brandt's Fug 10 receiver crackles, an eerie mix of jazz trumpet and Morse beeps on an American frequency. He follows the signal down a fjord whose sheer walls funnel katabatic winds strong enough to knock his fighter sideways. Instruments tremble, oil temperature plummets, suddenly the fjord widens into a fog-choked basin and the impossible appears: a colossal airfield, hewn straight into the pack ice, illuminated by sodium lamps, sunk in drilled holes. Over a dozen aircraft sit wing to wing, 3 Douglas A-20 Havocs, 4 Curtiss P-40 Warhawks, a trio of stub-winged consolidated Catalinas, and most startling, a pair of brand-new Lockheed P-38 Lightnings, whose silhouette Brandt has seen only in Allied propaganda. All bear Soviet red stars, hastily daubed over still tacky U.S. insignia. He snaps photos on Zeiss plates. As he circles, the runway's snowbanks part, revealing a camouflaged submarine pen where an American flag hangs half-furled beside the hammer and sickle. Brandt thinks, Lend-Lease isn't law yet. Washington swore neutrality. This is treason on ice. Yet something else chills him more. The runway is etched with strange hexagonal patterns, ice tiles reinforced by steel mesh, forming a giant geometric sigil, viewable only from altitude. He radios a coded burst to Trondheim, target lexicon, snow temple, prepare eagle. Seconds later, his engine coughs. A tracer streaks past, ground fire from a 37mm AA emplacement disguised as a whaling station. Brandt dives into cloud, shivering as cockpit glass frosts from rapid descent. The Daimler-Benz sputters, carburetor icing. He punches the glycol injection, praying. Back in Berlin, Luftwaffe signals Intercept Officer Hildegard Kramer decrypts Brandt's urgent -9 transmission. She cross-references Snow Temple with Abwehr files and finds an alarming footnote, code name used by rogue U.S. isolationist syndicate Wyoming Group, suspected to broker clandestine arms to USSR via Arctic sea lane. The report was buried months ago after Admiral Richter deemed it Anglo-paranoid fantasy. Kramer sprints to Jodel's midnight briefing. Present are Göring, agitated at any threat to Luftwaffe prestige, and Foreign Minister Ribbentrop, who fumes that Roosevelt's neutrality is as thin as Arctic ice. Photos flash onto a projector, glittering American airframes under a Soviet aurora. Gasps ripple through the room. Göring demands immediate Condor bomber raids. Jodl warns of overextension. Ribbentrop, sensing diplomatic gold, proposes Operation Glassbrook, a propaganda coup to expose U.S. duplicity at the next Swiss press conference. But Goebbels, arriving with cigar in hand, sees a richer narrative. Let the world believe Stalin needs Yankee planes. It paints the Red Army as weak. Hitler, summoned from his map table, studies the blown-up photograph of the P-38's twin booms gleaming under ice lamps. His jaw tightens. If Washington feeds Stalin in secret, he hisses, then Moscow must fall before winter, or we fight two giants at once. Thus, an already reckless timetable tightens another notch, thousands of kilometers away, in a moss-walled Quonset hut, overlooking the same frozen runway. Commander Abigail Abby Cross of the U.S. Naval Intelligence Clandestine Service adjusts her headset. She listens as Brandt's fading engine sputters across the shortwave band, then fade to static. Cross turns to her Soviet liaison, Major Lev Novikov, face lit by a single kerosene lamp. "Your German found us quicker than you promised," she says evenly, pulling her parka tighter. Novikov shrugs. Weather shifts. Next convoy must be unloaded faster. Outside, American ground crews, technically civilian contractors, work alongside Red Army mechanics, swapping out Allison engines for Soviet blended fuel calibrations. They have 72 hours before polar night swallows the airstrip in darkness, and perhaps longer before Berlin acts on Brandt's discovery. Yet every hour counts. Cross opens a teletype line to WWII-D7, a secure station in Cheyenne, sending 3 words only: cold window compromised. Far off in Wyoming, a board of isolationist industrialists will decide whether to double down or sever ties, leaving Stalin scrambling for replacements just as his Tundra air bridge is born. Meanwhile, Oberleutnant Brandt makes an emergency landing on a frozen lake, 120 kilometers south. Alone with a revolver and a cracked radio, he waits for rescue, mindful that Soviet patrols are likely closer than Luftwaffe search parties. As night checks in, the aurora returns, pale green curtains rippling above the ice. In their glow, the hexagonal runway patterns he saw earlier haunt his thoughts, precise, ritualistic. What if those shapes weren't for structural integrity, but for something else? The occult whisper he heard in Berlin's corridors of runes and prophecies echoes in the biting wind. Brandt loads a flare gun. Should a Soviet ski patrol appear, he'll burn the reconnaissance plates before capture. The world can't see proof of American planes wearing Soviet stars, yet deep inside he wrestles with a pilot's dread, not of death or prison, but of flying ever again without questioning the sky's mirages, because somewhere between the aurora and the ice, truth itself refracts. Unbeknownst to Brandt, his photographs will ignite rivalries in Berlin, Washington, and Moscow, each scheming to spin or bury the evidence. And in that spreading web of lies, a single misfiled negative may one day intersect with a prophecy about two brothers and a winter heart of steel. But for now, the Arctic keeps its secrets frozen under a mirror-bright moon as the first snow of polar night begins to fall. Leningrad, 8 October 1941. Day 56 of the siege. Frost clings to the bronze lions of Palace Embankment as the Neva slows beneath its first skin of black ice. Inside the labyrinthine basement of the All-Union Radio Committee, 30-year-old poet Anya Sokolova lights a stub of candle and adjusts a salvaged RCA microphone whose vacuum tubes glow like dying embers. Above her, German artillery thumps from Pulkovo heights. Each detonation dribbles plaster across her manuscript. Anya is already a voice of endurance for the starving city. Her broadcasts, midnight poems for the blockade, go out every other night on shortwave band 31.6 MHz, where desperate citizens huddle round crystal sets wired to car batteries. But only 3 people in Leningrad know the poems carry a second purpose. They are ciphers. Months earlier, Anya's mentor, cryptographer-turned-librarian Professor Ilya Mendeleev, taught her a syllabic acrostic technique derived from medieval Church Slavonic hymns. Each poem is exactly 172 syllables, a prime number favored by NKVD code tables. Every fourth stressed syllable, when mapped to a polybius square keyed on Pushkin's Eugene Onegin, produces digraphs denoting German artillery coordinates, troop strengths, or ammunition stockpiles observed by partisan spotters inside enemy lines. Tonight's poem, Elegy in Tin Can Shadows, hides a vital update. The Wehrmacht's northern siege ring is weakest near the bombed-out porcelain factory, where a single pontoon bridge ferries supplies across the frozen Okhta. Break that bridge, and Lake Ladoga's ice road, the road of life, might reopen sooner. Anya steps to the mic, recites in a calm alto that masks her hollow cheeks. Night pours through bullet-holed shutters, yet the moon stitches silver paths over tar paper roofs. Follow the loosened seam where dawn forgets to mend. The words flutter through ether, past the aurora scattering over Karelia and out across Europe. 400 kilometers west, in a camouflaged signals hut on the Gulf of Finland island of Suorpalinki, a Royal Navy Y service crew, led by Lieutenant Miles Harrington, captures the transmission. Harrington, a classic scholar at Oxford before the war, recognizes the meter as trochaic tetrameter, but also notices the suspicious regularity of every fourth stress. Within hours, he forwards a transcription to Bletchley Park, where cryptanalyst Joan Clark and her section feed it into a bomba configured with the Onegin key, recently recovered from a Soviet defector's satchel. They break the cipher by noon, confirming Soviet intent. Sabotage the Okhta pontoon. Yet London is wary of aiding Stalin openly. Churchill must balance sympathy for Leningrad against fears of German reprisals on British convoys. Section D of MI6 proposes a subtler plan: invert the message and leak it back, this time decoded to German intelligence, thereby luring the Wehrmacht to reinforce the very sector Anya wants left vulnerable, stretching their lines elsewhere. In Berlin, the counterfeit decipherment, routed through a bribed Swedish telegrapher, lands on Admiral Canaris's desk. It claims the Red Army will attempt a breakout south of the Neva, not north. Skeptical but under pressure, after rumors of Project Matryoshka, Canaris forwards it to Field Marshal von Lieb, who diverts 2 artillery batteries and a pioneer brigade away from the porcelain factory. The result on the ground is immediate. German sentries rotate south, leaving the pontoon bridge guarded by conscripted Latvian auxiliaries with dwindling ammunition, exactly as Anya hoped. Meanwhile, Leningrad tightens its belt another notch. Daily rations drop to 300 grams of sawdust-filled bread per person. In the Philharmonic Hall, musicians practice Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony in greatcoats, their breath clouding over violin strings. Anya, after each broadcast, trudges home along Nevsky Prospect past queues of citizens, scraping wallpaper for edible paste. Yet her secret work buys hope. 3 nights after the deception takes hold, NKVD saboteurs on reindeer hide skis creep across the Okta's splintering ice, plant amalgam charges under the pontoon trestles, and detonate them at dawn. A roar like splitting granite shakes the frozen river. With the bridge gone, German supply flow stutters, artillery fire slows just enough for Soviet engineers to extend the first planks of a new Ladoga ice road before deep winter seals their chance. But victories carry echoes. British propaganda chief Sefton Delmer seizes on Anya's poem, stripped of cipher, as an emblem of civilian defiance, broadcasting it back into Germany via Soldatensender Calais. German soldiers at the front hear her haunting lines in their own tongue and begin passing mimeographed copies trench to trench. Some see only poetry, others suspect coded sabotage and report it to the Gestapo, who launch a fruitless witch hunt for Operative Silver Path. Back in Leningrad, Anya learns her verses now circulate among the enemy. She ponders the paradox. Art meant to liberate her city now feeds German paranoia, and that paranoia has unknowingly served her purpose. Words, she realizes, can be artillery aimed in any direction once loosed upon the air. On 2 November, Anya climbs the spire of the Writers' Union building to read siege updates scribbled on a plywood board. Snowflakes swirl like ash against the crimson sky as distant gunfire cracks. She listens to the silence after each shell, imagining the empty stretch where the pontoon once stood. For the first time in weeks, she lets herself believe the blockade might break. Then she descends to her cellar studio, sets fresh paper in her typewriter, and begins a new poem, carefully counting syllables, every fourth stress, striking like a metronome of resistance, while beyond the shattered windows, the city of Peter the Great holds its breath and keeps listening. Upper Dnieper Basin, 18 October 1941, 40 kilometers east of Smolensk. A slanted moon hangs over the Turov hydroelectric complex, its turbines long silent since the Germans severed the grid. On the spillway's iced catwalk, Colonel Natalia Orlova, water engineer turned NKVD flood warfare officer, checks the luminous dial of a modified Swiss pocket watch. Each clock hand is tipped with radium paint. Each tick marks a kilometer of German advance reported by scouts. At 23:17, the second hand passes the red notch she inked hours ago. That is the signal. Panzergruppe Guderian has entered the Pripyat lowlands, exactly where Orlova intends them to drown. Orlova's demolition team works in absolute blackout, headlamps hooded with cigarette foil. They have spent 3 weeks tunneling beneath the dam's granite abutment, packing hexenite bricks into chambers that once housed inspection ladders. Their explosive pattern maps the stress lines of the dam like acupuncture points. Too little force and the wall will merely crack. Too much and the entire reservoir will bleed out at once, leaving nothing but silt. What Orlova needs is controlled rupture, enough water to turn roads into quagmires, but not so much that downstream villages, now partisan havens, wash away. Hidden beside her in the dark stands Major Kirill Reznikov of the 4th Partisan Brigade, a former forest ranger whose men have felled trees across every track between the reservoir and the Minsk highway. The Germans call this land their shortcut, he mutters, frost forming on his mustache. Let's make it the long way. A brass whistle sounds twice, the all clear from Sapper's upland. Orlova pulls the charging handle of a field telephone, wired to 24 detonator circuits. Before she flips the knife switch, she thinks of her pre-war thesis on Soviet irrigation futures, shelved now beneath casualty lists. Water was meant to feed us, she reflects. Tonight it will defend us instead. She signals Reznikov. He squeezes the plunger. The hillside convulses in a muffled throat boom. A spider web of fractures races across the dam face, valves shear, penstocks howl like wounded bears. 10 million cubic meters of reservoir surge forward, carrying uprooted pines, cattle fences, even a chapel bell, whose toll rides the flood like a requiem. Downstream, minor dams chained along feeder rivers obey their fail-safe pins and shatter in sympathetic bursts, a hydrological domino-coded Operation Sviatka. Within hours, tributaries of the Dnieper and Pripyat overspill into adjacent peat bogs. Saturated moss floats free, forming a deceptive crust over knee-deep sludge. By dawn, what yesterday was a firm dirt road is today a soupy mire sucking at boots and half-tracks alike. On 19 October, Oberst Kurt Langendorf of 3rd Panzer Division drives a command Kubelwagen toward Orsha, confident of a flanking dash to Tula. 20 kilometers in, the vehicle sinks axle deep. Its tires spin, flinging mud like mortar. Langendorf radios back. Road condition untenable. Request Pioneer Company. The reply instructs patience. Every bridging unit is already rescuing heavier armor, similarly mired. Photographs from Luftwaffe reconnaissance planes reveal a chessboard of stranded hardware, Panzer III hulls half-submerged, supply Opel Blitz trucks tilted like sinking barges, horse-drawn limbers drowned to their trace chains. Worse, fuel bowsers rupture, oil slicking the mud into a treacherous stew that no tracked vehicle can gain purchase upon. Guderian scribbles in his diary, terrain suddenly resembles a morass, was dry only yesterday, divine intervention. No, Colonel Orlova's. Far upriver, Orlova assembles her aides beneath a canvas tarp lit by carbide lantern. Using chalk on a sheet of tin, she sketches the Bingham yield stress curve for saturated loam. Once water content exceeds 42%, shear strength collapses exponentially. We've pushed the roads to 55, she announces. Even with frost tonight, they'll freeze only at the surface. Beneath will remain porridge. Her staff break into relieved laughter that quickly turns to coughing. Their breath condenses, mixing with cordite fumes still clinging to their coats. Yet victory breeds new concerns. Destroyed dams deny electricity to towns prepping Winterfield hospitals. Orlova petitions Stavka for portable turbines, but receives only a curt telegram. Success compensates hardship. Continue flooding secondary basins. She wonders how many civilians will pay the price of her hydrological war, but the alternative, a Wehrmacht sprint to Moscow, is unthinkable. Weeks later, a courier train bearing Project Matryoshka components from Jakob Richter's mountain factory crawls across the same region. Its locomotive commander radios ahead for track conditions and receives a cryptic response. Lines serviceable, but the land around them has become sea. The phrase puzzles Richter when he reads it in his office. Somewhere in his memory, the words rhyme with a childhood story his brother Karl once told. A story about Noah, perhaps. The brief nudge of nostalgia is quickly buried under schedules and quotas. In the Reich Chancellery, generals squabble over responsibility. Some blame poor road reconnaissance. Others suspect deliberate sabotage. Himmler's SS Onederbe faction whispers of Slavic water magic, citing Willigut's runic warnings. Hitler rages at the cowardice of machines and orders heavier Tigers rushed from prototype lines to plow through the mud, unaware that their weight will bury them deeper. At the edge of the newly formed Lake Reznikov, a bog that will not exist on any map, Orlova stands ankle-deep in muck, surveying the mirrored sky. Far off, the muffled growl of a stalled panzer echoes like distant thunder. She pockets her radium watch, now splattered with mud, and allows herself one whispered toast, to the power of small fractures. In the coming months, soldiers on both sides will curse the Rasputitsa, that infamous Russian season when Earth turns to glue. Few will guess its worst iteration of 1941 was no act of nature, but the calculated handiwork of a hydrologist who weaponized water itself. And as the first true blizzards gather over the steppe, the mud will freeze into iron ruts, snaring armies in tracks of their own making, while the war's deeper currents flow toward a pair of brothers destined to collide beneath a mountain of snowbound steel. Zawód Pobedy. Urals. 27 November, 1941. 0340 hours. A blizzard swirls down the access shaft like a column of powdered glass as Chief Engineer Jakob Richter strides into Sector O. Moments earlier, he triggered the red line override that seals every surface exit with 2-ton blast doors. Sirens wail, echoing along corridors plated with frost-slick steel. Factory loudspeakers boom his voice in curt, martial Russian. All personnel will assemble in the lower turbine hall. Effective immediately, command authority transfers from Director Myasnikov to Engineer First Class J. Richter under Directive 8 Aleph. The stunned workforce obeys. Part terror, part relief. Myasnikov is already on the floor, wrists cinched with electrical cable, coat smeared in the refrigerant that leaked when Jakob's loyal mechanics jammed the cryovalves. Irina Valenkova, NKVD captain, glares at Jakob from behind a ring of soldiers, pistol half raised. He meets her eyes without blinking and calls her bluff, "Shoot me," and the vault stays locked. Moscow wants results, not corpses. Valenkova hesitates. She was ordered to protect Project Matryoshka at any cost except its destruction. The barrel lowers. Jakob wins the factory without firing a shot. Deep beneath the assembly floor, the cryogenic vault hisses open. Inside rests the Matryoshka core, 7 concentric spheres of silvered magnesium, each smaller than the last, each suspended in its own bath of supercooled brine. Jakob's engineering team has guessed at its purpose. Chain-staged fuel cells? A pressure wave detonator? But only he and 2 party scientists have seen the final schematics. When linked to the T-60 laid lightning engines, the smallest sphere will power a pulse plasma projector capable of vaporizing armored columns at ranges artillery cannot dream of. A single prototype already exists, but it still needs field calibration and a target. Jakob addresses the captive supervisors. "Comrades, your loyalty to papers from Moscow is admirable. Mine is to physics. If you continue obeying fools who think winter and slogans will win this war, you'll die nameless in these tunnels. Follow me, and we finish the weapon on our own terms, and choose how it is used." Some balk, but most are exhausted by midnight quotas and secret arrests. They nod. Valenkova, calculating odds, holsters her pistol. "We build," she says flatly, "but you explain this mutiny to Marshal Zhukov." Jakob almost smiles. "I plan to, once success is guaranteed." 2 kilometers above, Colonel Karl Richter's armored scout train screeches into the mountain station, engines icing over Inferno 28 tall sea air. After weeks of dodging partisan sabotage and the man-made mud of the Dnieper Basin, Karl has tracked the Matryoshka crates to their terminus. He exits the locomotive with 20 Waffen-SS troopers disguised as Wehrmacht railway police. Snowflakes sting like glass dust against searchlights. The platform is curiously deserted. A lone engineer in felt boots approaches, hands raised, offering surrender in German. "Guten Abend, Herr Richter. Your brother waits." Karl's heart spasms. Only Jakob would know he was coming. Yet the platform whines carry a different fear. The rails behind his train are now glowing cherry red. A hidden switchyard crew has electrified the track with stolen dynamo current. One wrong step and German boots will ground a lethal circuit. Karl orders his men to stand down. An hour later, inside the turbine hall, Jakob and Karl face each other for the first time in 27 years. Snow melts off Karl's greatcoat, puddling on warm concrete. Jakob's spectacles fog under the sudden heat. For a breath they are boys again, arguing over clockwork toys in their Königsberg attic. Then the war floods back in. Jakob gestures to the Matryoshka core, rotating beneath banks of ultraviolet lamps. That brooder will decide whether millions die quickly or slowly. Help me sabotage Hitler's war machine, and we can spare your soldiers, my workers, maybe even ourselves. Karl's reply is ice-edged. You ask treason against my oath. Jakob counters with ledgers, photographs of Auschwitz foundations, decrypted orders for the starvation of Leningrad, atrocities Karl has heard rumors of but never seen in black and white. Your oath, Jakob says softly, is already ashes. He offers terms: safe passage for the workers, a covert evacuation route north via the Snow Temple airfield, still half secret from Berlin and Moscow alike. Engineered failure. Karl's panzers will receive lightning-powered tanks, gifts from ostensibly captured Soviet technology, but Jakob can rig a microfracture that will seize the plasma projector after a single firing, frying onboard crews and rendering the weapon useless to the Reich. A public victory. Karl retains credit for the capture. When the prototype malfunctions, blame will fall on inferior Soviet craftsmanship, sparing Karl from suspicion while buying time for Jakob's exfiltration. Agree, Jakob concludes, and you salvage your honor. Refuse, and I flood these caverns with the core's coolant. The resulting blast will vaporize us both and cripple this sector of the Urals. Either way, Hitler loses. Karl searches his brother's face for madness, finds only weary conviction. Outside, gale-driven ice scrapes the ventilation louvers like skeletal fingers. In that clawing sound, Karl hears echoes of Willigut's prophecy. Steel meets winter's heart. Is this the fulcrum? The brother's hand? The rune master feared? Before Karl can answer, alarms shriek. A Soviet courier plane has crash-landed beyond the ridge, bringing orders from Moscow to transfer Matryoshka west, immediately to a safer Kazakh site. Valenkova rushes in, eyes aflame. Engineers, start disassembly. Colonel, decide now, your train leaves before dawn. Jakob turns to Karl, palm open over the master control panel. One lever floods the core. Another lifts it onto rail dolly for handover to Soviet High Command. Either choice, once pulled, is irreversible. Karl thinks of his frozen tanks mired in Orlova's manufactured mud, of Brandt's photographs proving American aid, of Anya's eerie poems drifting over besieged radios. Every front in this war seems stitched with invisible threads, and here is the knot at their center. He removes his officer's gloves, revealing the family signet ring. Slowly, deliberately, he places the ring on the console between them, a silent marker of truce or of surrender. Jakob's breath catches. Around them, turbine blades spin up. Electricity crackles, and the Matryoshka spheres begin to glow. A nested sunrise in the belly of the mountain. Whether that sunrise heralds salvation or annihilation, now rests on two brothers, bound by blood yet armed with opposing empires. The lever waits. The gambit stands. Winter outside deepens, but in the vault the air is suddenly perilously hot. Reich Chancellery. War Directive Chamber. 5 December 1941, 02:15. An icy wind funnels through smashed skylights, hastily boarded after last week's RAF raid, but the heat inside the map room is stifling. Red-eyed stenographers mop sweat from their brows as banks of Freya lamps blaze over wall-sized situation charts. In the cramped center stand the men who will gamble the Reich's fate on a winter throw. Adolf Hitler, uniform tunic discarded, pacing in shirt sleeves, stained with spilled tea. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, jaw locked, left hand trembling, each time a staffer updates unit strengths with a crimson pencil. Chief of Operations, Alfred Jodl and General Major Friedrich Paulus, burdened with the latest quartermaster tallies. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels, Notebook open to headlines he intends to run 3 days from now, announcing final drive on Moscow. On the margins, SS Brigadeführer Karl Maria Willigut waits like a shadow, palimpsest of Slavic runes clutched to his chest. A courier from OKH bursts in, snow-dusting his epaulets. The motor rifle regiments, spearheading toward Klin, have frozen radiators and dwindling fuel. Half their jerrycans thicken to tar. Keitel begins, "My Führer." Guderian's liaison warns that, but Hitler cuts him off, finger-stabbing the map. Warns. The enemy bleeds. One more push, and Stalin sues for peace before Roosevelt can airlift another crate of Yankees painted red through that Arctic circus. He means the clandestine Kola airfield. Brandt's negatives sit in a dossier on the table, stamped Verboten, eigenhändig. Goering promised bombers but delays mounted. The runway likely lies under blizzard drifts now, yet the photos haunt Hitler's nights. Abwehr Chief Admiral Canaris presents 2 conflicting decrypts. A British intercept, really the MI6 inversion of Anya Sokolova's cipher, claiming Red Army reserves mass south of Tula, paper tigers meant to threaten our flank. A fresh report from frontline radio scouts. Coded chatter about Snegsurtsi, Winterhart troop groupings north of Moscow. Keitel argues for caution. Jodl counters with timetable math. Every day of delay shortens the window before temperatures plunge from Buenos 15 tableteers, where engines gel solid. But Goebbels, eyes gleaming behind pince nez, wields morale statistics. The public, primed by months of victories, now craves the capital's fall as proof of inevitable triumph. Willigut steps forward unbidden, rune scroll unfurled. Mein Führer, the prophecy warns that steel meeting winter's heart invites catastrophe. His voice trembles with genuine dread. Keitel exhales in relief. Finally, someone says it aloud. Yet the very invocation of prophecy seals the debate. Hitler loathes any omen that dares challenge will. He slams a palm on the table. Then we shatter the heart before it beats. At 0347, Hitler dictates an addendum to Directive 39, codenaming the final assault Donnerkeil, Thunderbolt, immediate renewal of the Moscow thrust, despite sub-zero forecasts. Redeployment of 2nd and 3rd Panzer armies northward. Skirting the very marshes Colonel Orlova flooded, because staff planners falsely believe the recent freeze has rendered them passable. Requisition of every winterized engine prototype, including 24 lightning-powered T-60 tanks, seized from Zavod Pobedy, unaware Jakob Richter's microfractures lurk inside. SS Anerbe psychological campaign. Goebbels will broadcast that German steel masters the elements prophesied by Slavic superstition, turning Willigut's own warnings into propaganda cudgels. Paulus objects. Fuel stocks at Smolensk cannot supply a broadened pincer. Hitler responds with arithmetic stripped of logistics. Moscow is 80 kilometers distant. 1 tank of petrol reaches it. 2 return. Reality, Paulus knows, is 3 to 5. But silence is safer than truth tonight. In a side corridor, Oberst Eduard Wagner, Quartermaster General, scribbles frantic requisitions for winter parkas. Whitewash, glycerin coolant. Depot chief's radio, back the same refrain, stockpiles rerouted, convoys stuck axle deep, locomotives iced on sidings. Wagner signs off on emergency procurement through local seizure, code for stripping villages bare. Privately he jots a grim footnote: if rails fail, we burn horseflesh, men next. Back in the map room, the red pencil continues its lethal dance. Strength figures inflated by staffers under pressure now collide with stark casualty memos from field hospitals, many withheld to keep charts rosy. The numbers themselves revolt, columns no longer reconcile, yet arithmetic cannot scream, so the lie persists. Willigut, dismissed, retreats to a window alcove. and watches snow swirl beneath floodlights. He overhears Goebbels rehearsing sound bites. German resolve forges victory from frost. The occultist mutters a counterspell under his breath. But words he fears are snowflakes on a furnace. At 0512, radio transmitters across occupied Europe crackle. An alle Heeresgruppen Donnerkeil beginnt Nullität, vorwärts zum Endsieg. Staff officers scramble, stamping most secret envelopes. Dispatch riders roar off into the frigid dark. No one notices the youngest clerk slip a carbon copy into his satchel. Within 36 hours it will reach Zurich, and from there, London. Meanwhile, hundreds of lightning engines, Jacob's booby-trapped children, are loaded onto flat cars bound for the front. Somewhere amid the icy forests, Colonel Karl Richter rides shotgun atop the lead wagon, ringless hand clenched in his greatcoat pocket, replaying Jacob's ultimatum. One malfunction, he thinks, and I become executioner of my own men. Yet obedience, betrayal, and survival have fused into a single indistinct path, like tire tracks vanishing beneath new snow. Berlin's street lamps glow dim behind blackout shields as first light crawls over the spree. Steam billows from train yards, mingling with chimney smoke to form a low gray ceiling. Beneath it, the Reich hurtles east on rails already groaning from cold, driven by figures who mistake schedules for destiny. Far away, on frost-hardened roads that were mud a week ago, armored columns rumble forward, unaware that steel, prophecy, and a brother's hidden sabotage have conspired to turn their advance into the hinge of history. The dice are cast, the board is winter, and Berlin, heedless, has wagered everything on a blind bet. Ural foothills. 29 November 1941, 00. The Matryoshka core spins in its cradle, each nested sphere now glowing a feverish blue. Jacob's hand hovers over the coolant flood lever. Karl's grips the rail dolly release that would send the weapon west toward Hitler's armies. Around them, turbines howl and capacitor banks throb like iron hearts about to burst. Outside, Valenkova's NKVD platoon and Karl's disguised SS troopers aim weapons across a lattice of catwalks, neither side daring to fire lest a bullet nick the charged plasma coils. Snow swirls in through shattered clerestory windows, hissing to steam on hot transformers and filling the hall with ghostly vapor. Jacob breaks the stalemate. "We choose now," he says, voice raw. One pull ends the Reich's advance, and us. The other condemns tens of thousands to die under a flag that loathes them. He looks at Karl, eyes pleading for the brother, not the officer. Karl's gaze slides to the family signet ring resting on the console. A twin-headed eagle, Prussian pride now stained with frost. He whispers, "Father taught us duty above blood." But duty to what? The question hangs like ice on a cable. A distant explosion rattles the mountain. A Soviet courier plane, downed by German flak, has spilled decals and blueprints across the slope. Valenkova's radio crackles with Stavka's frantic order. Corps must not fall into enemy hands. Destroy if capture imminent. She thumbs her pistol hammer back. At that exact instant, a power surge flickers the lights. Karl's lightning engine flat cars have reached the front line, and their booby-trapped plasma projectors ignite in unison, frying entire panzer platoons in blinding arcs of white lightning. Field radios scream, Donnerkeil's spearhead crumbles. The prophecy's steel-meeting winter's heart has begun, in sparks, not snow. Karl feels the tremor in his chest. Before it registers in his ears, he knows the sabotage worked. He also knows the SS Cipher Bureau will trace the defect to Zavod Pobedi. Within days, retribution squads will raise everything and everyone connected to the plant. Karl turns to Jacob. "I choose family." He slams the coolant flood lever. Liquid nitrogen vomits from vents, flash freezing the core's outer shell. crystalline fractures race inward. The Matryoshka spheres shriek, compress, then collapse upon themselves in an implosion that drinks sound before expelling it as a thunderclap. The blast's pressure wave lifts the turbine hall roof like a tin sheet and hurls men from catwalks into a gulf of vapor and shattered ice. When the roar fades, the core is slag, its threat extinct. The brothers lie amid snow and twisted steel. Alive but bloodied, Valenkova staggers to her feet, salutes Jakob wordlessly, and orders a withdrawal. There is nothing left here worth Stalin's or Hitler's wrath. Karl presses the signet ring back into Jakob's palm. "Keep it," he rasps. "Proof a Richter stopped the Reich." Jakob grips his brother's hand until he feels pulse weak but present, and then ushers Soviet medics to drag Karl onto an ambulance sled bound for a prisoner depot. In exchange, he hands Valenkova a slate of full production schematics, leverage enough to save Karl from a firing squad, or so he hopes. Above the mountain, dawn stains the blizzard clouds pink. What remains of Zavod Pobedi exhales one last plume of nitrogen fog, then falls silent forever. Conclusion: the winter heart shattered. On the front, the booby-trapped lightning tanks short-circuited at the moment of Donnerkeil's launch, turning key panzer columns into flaming statues just as temperatures plunged below 30°, with supply lines mired by Orlova's engineered mud and now clogged by burned-out hulls. The German drive on Moscow stalled for good on 5 December 1941, the historical turning point historians would later mark as the beginning of Hitler's irreversible decline. In Berlin, news of the malfunction reached Hitler hours after the Zavod explosion. Willigut's final memorandum: "The brothers have fulfilled the rune." Winter claims the Eagle was dismissed as madness. Yet Goebbels buried the catastrophe beneath headlines celebrating heroic consolidation. Inside the Chancellery, disbelief curdled into paranoia that would consume the Nazi hierarchy for the rest of the war. In the Soviet Union, Stavka announced the miraculous salvation of Zavod Pobedi, crediting unnamed heroes and relegating Jakob's coup to sealed archives. Valenkova secured safe passage for surviving engineers through the Arctic air bridge that Abbey Cross's Americans continued to supply openly now that Lend-Lease was law. For the brothers, Karl spent the remainder of the war in a Siberian POW infirmary, tending frostbite victims and translating German medical texts. Jakob oversaw reconstruction of civilian turbines, not weapons, under Valenkova's discreet protection. Letters between them, smuggled via partisans who once sabotaged Karl's rail lines, spoke of engines meant only to move grain in light cities when peace finally thawed the world. The prophecies echo. Decades later, a Novgorod museum curator rediscovered the birch bark palimpsest and noticed two new ink strokes, fresh yet identical to the ancient hand, marking the stanza about a brother's hand. No record revealed who added them. Operation Barbarossa thus ended, not in the swift conquest Hitler envisioned, but in an avalanche of hidden decisions, a cryptanalyst's hunch, a poet's coded stanza, a hydrologist's flood, a pilot's illicit photographs, and most decisive, a fraternal lever pulled in a frozen cavern. Steel met Winter's heart, and Winter and blood won.